I'm recording right now.
I'm recording right now as well. And we are live.
That's right.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your Bedroom Super Producer Podcast. Episode, is it number 12?
Episode number 12.
Number 12. We are your hosts. My name is JT.
My name is BK.
And this is part 2 of our Daft Punk series. After recording the previous episode, we both agreed, BK and I, that we had way much more to talk about when it came to Daft Punk than for just one episode. So we decided to reboot, let's say, and go into the future with their latest album, and we are going to dissect this one and only album. What's the title again, BK?
I think the title is Random Access Memory.
Random Access Memories. And this was quite the blessing when it came out. Was it 2013?
I think it was 2013. It was something pretty different from what they usually do. Don't you agree?
I think that when the first teasers came online, I was blown away.
Of course.
I was hearing that classic disco sound.
When was the first time you saw the teasers?
I can't remember, but do you remember when they started to post? I think it was on Saturday Night Live.
For me, that was the first time. During the commercial.
It like 15 seconds long, something?
Yeah, during the commercial break in SNL, I think there was like a little break, and they introduced, I think it was Get Lucky.
Exactly. And then that thing spread like wildfire.
Yeah, like, and we knew something was up.
And honestly, within those 15 seconds, I was first shook, and then I was sold. I thought that this seemed like the most awesome Daft Punk song I'd ever heard, and I don't think I was disappointed when I heard the full length of the song.
Yeah, it was something. For me, it was something totally different, because I thought they reinvented themselves when they did the soundtrack for Tron, and now just like 2 years later, they did it again with the Random Access Memory.
And I think that we were just talking about this off the air. I think that it really came as a statement from the French guys that, you kind of had to give life back to music.
Indeed, it was like a message to the whole music community. I think that they've always been very candid about the state of the music scene, especially the electronic EDM music scene, that they helped to like invent themselves. But they were always very candid about the fact that they thought that there was a little bit of soul missing, that the whole laptop producer could use a little bit more analog warmth, as we could say.
Yeah, and I really liked this idea that Thomas Bangalter said in an interview, where he said, at the end of the day, the laptop is not a musical instrument on its own,
True.
And you could argue that some of the newer EDM producers, people like Skrillex, they really play it like an instrument, like they really know the ins and outs of software synthesizers and all of that. But it's not the same as, jamming with a band and coming into groove and harmony and really locking on those things live with other human beings. There's some kind of magic to that also.
Well, I think what he meant is that mostly what you do on a laptop or a normal computer, when you're on it, unless you're playing with a VST or a virtual instrument, you're pretty much like sequencing on the fly, right? You're using loops that you trigger at different times, and kind of like a DJ between his vinyls or his CDs or whatever. So I think that's what he meant when he said it's not really an instrument. I think it was because many people think that they're playing an instrument when in fact they're just sequencing sounds together.
Right.
You could say it's a form of playing, but it's not like playing a clavinet or playing even like on a MIDI keyboard. It depends on like we could argue this definition and this opinion for a while, but I think that's what he meant.
Right. So Random Access Memories was basically produced over a span of like 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's been said that the cost of production was over $1 million.
Yeah,
So
I think they called it the $1 million album, and Daft Punk themselves confirmed in an interview that it was more than that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something, because when you think about again, people who record, mix, master everything on their laptops, put it out there on Spotify and call it a day. You kind of have to scratch your head at what these two guys were doing back in 2013 to come up with an album that took 5 to 10 times more to just produce, and then cost a zillion more than most people invest in today.
True.
So, I was reading this article in Sound on Sound with Peter Franco, one of the main engineers on the project, and I found it fascinating that they actually recorded everything, both in digital on a Pro Tools rig and directly to tape. I thought that was
analog. They really did it like the good old days. I think they had two engineers, right? Peter Franco and Mike Gazonsky also.
Right.
Both of these guys have like pretty good resumes, and I think Peter Franco, he had worked with them for the live album, the 2007 Daft Live,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. So it's no surprise why this album is so good also.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I guess they found some kind of magic between, the Daft Punk guys and Franco himself.
And I think same for Mike Gazonsky. I think that's like an old school guy from like way back the 80s, even the 70s. He's worked with like everyone. I think he recorded like Earth, Wind and Fire and Madonna and like George Benson and even a young upstart called Mariah Carey back in the days.
So was that the guy that actually mixed, like he laid out the whole mixing desk for the mixing process of the album?
I think he did. I think he had like multiple duties. It depends with which artist he did, but he mixed pretty much everything. I think on this album, Peter Franco and I think another guy, they like put everything together, got everything ready when they like recorded everything, and then at the end of the day, Mike came in and did the final mix down.
Right.
All analog, I think, a Neve console or something, and like in the good old days. I think that was the whole point. I think that Daft Punk wanted to do. They wanted to kind of revisit all these techniques and all the way the way you would make a record in the 70s and in the 80s, and like do an album for themselves in that particular way.
Yeah, it's kind of a time capsule type deal where they basically wanted to, and I mean, we're the same age as these guys, and so I mean, Earth, Wind and Fire, for example, that's the music that I still listen to today when I'm trying to get inspired. Like,
yeah, it's timeless.
It is absolutely timeless. Even in the digital realm, you listen to the latest DJ Tiesto song, and then you listen back to an Earth, Wind and Fire song, and it actually sounds as loud. It sounds warmer. It sounds as punchy. So, again, goes back to the discussion we had before pressing record on the episode. But there's some of that magic that is getting more lost as time goes on. These techniques like the mic placement, the choice of different microphones and amp settings, and then the outboard gear to mix, and the desk, the way you set it up for the mixing process, and even the mastering. I feel like these records, they have soul that will never be deniable. Whether if you're a live musician, a gearhead, a techie that does everything in a box, like everyone can really truly appreciate the soul of these old records.
Well, I think it's a question of the way things are recorded has changed so much over the years that we've seen kind of the recording process has been kind of democratized over the years. So more and more people have access to it these days with computers and plugins and the whole bedroom producer formula. So it's very good in a certain way that you have access to all these tools, but at the same time, you kind of lose that old way of making records with the old analog gear and the big consoles and the fact that you needed someone very qualified to operate all these things, and the fact that there were only a couple of places in the world, like not all studios had all that gear. So the fact that it was only a specific places where you could go, where basically all these superstars of mixing, of producing, of recording, of playing, the session players, and everyone would be pretty much around the same spot. So I think that's how they got that magic, because everyone was first very good at their job, and everyone played on everyone's records. Everyone recorded pretty much at the same studios. At the same time, it was very, very expensive gear. To service it was also very expensive.
And still is. It still is.
And still is. The recording process was very expensive. I mean, like for a normal record, I think even back in the days could cost something like $350,000, $400,000 just to record, like to get the session players, to the studio time and renting the equipment and everything. And usually, even the labels, they wouldn't pay for it. They would charge it to the artist at the cost of their future sales that they would make on the album. So I think it's two ways to think about the same process, but it's normal that in the digital age, it's going to sound way different than way back when like the records were pretty much coming out of the same studios, which had that awesome gears that would cost millions and millions of dollars and still costs millions and millions of dollars.
Right. I feel like that's maybe why, or the situation would explain why we see a lot of these studio musicians now go to certain very specific pieces of outboard gear. Say, for example, you'll see a studio in which the main, like the brain of the studio is obviously just a MacBook, but then maybe the person will stack up in like a traveling case, maybe a Space Echo, and then some kind of distortion, and maybe a reverb unit or a delay unit. And that way, more modern musicians have a way to kind of capture the aura and the soul of these old recordings or recording techniques, but still keeping the convenience of the laptop.
Well, of course, like I think it's no secret that like basically we love working within the box, but having always that little bit of extra gear, like that outboard gear, we like to call it, is always a plus, because you get that little bit of non-linear reactivity from those circuits, and that little bit of a noise thing here and there, or that special way a circuit was soldered or something from like an old processor, and you can like kind of get that little bit of analog magic. And I think it's the same way as the way people use outboard just for preamps,
Right.
or a specific mic that you're going to be using. to get that special character, like a special that special mic. Combine that mic with a, I don't know, it could be any external, like an Avalon preamp or anything like that, just to get that special sound that you want, or just to differentiate yourself from like all the other sounds that people can be making out there. Like I said earlier, it's since everyone now can record in the room, you need sometimes a little bit of extra gear just to get a special sound that not everyone's going to be able to make on their computers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So going back to Random Access Memories, Franco said in the same interview that the guys, they basically were just writing on their analog synths. He said that they were using at the time an original Prophet 5, Jupiter 6, Juno 106, Yamaha CS80. And then once they had like the chords down or some very, very basic skeletons off of those analog synths, then they'd go to the session players. Is that what you gathered from your research?
Well, I think first of all, like you said earlier, the way the album was recorded was over a long period of time. I think they had demos of this album. I think it was up to maybe 4 to 5 years prior to the release, which probably puts it around maybe 2007, 2008, like at the end of their tour.
The Alive tour, yeah.
So I think they had already their ideas and were already writing things back then. From what I gathered, that the first ideas they had were very much Daft Punk from what they used to do, and like a lot of machines, a lot of drum machines and different synth, and they at some point I think they stopped because they wanted to maybe have another approach to the album. And I think in between that like demo phase that they did by themselves, they did the soundtrack for Tron, which opened them to the whole world of writing not just for themselves but for like a bigger audience, and also to work with session players, because they had a big orchestra of more, I think it was something like 85 people of the orchestra that were in the orchestra.
Wow.
for that soundtrack. So I think they got more comfortable to be able to put their magic touch, their like electronic, combining the Moogs and a little bit of the drum machines with the different session players. And I think combining that with the fact that they wanted to explore some like new grounds, or maybe do an album differently from what they had done previously, I think that's how Random Access Memory was born. And then after, I think we come back to what you said earlier, that they started composing on all these old synth. And once they had that basic ideas, they would have the session players come in, and I think they selected specific people that they wanted to work with, and people that they respected from that 70s, 80s era, and even people from more of like today, that they wanted to get that little bit of sprinkle their magic on their record. So I think that's pretty much how they did it. I think they recorded pretty much everything, and then they did they returned to it and they chopped it up like they usually do, and kept just kept just the things that they liked. And but if you listen to the album, there's not much. They sampled stuff they sampled from themselves basically, and from all the session players and what everyone did. But it's not like micro chopping like we're used to them doing. They kept like big segments. They said, oh, we like the energy of this part, and they kept it whole. And that's what I think that's the magic of this album, that's so unlike them, but at the same time redefines their style. They kept the magical moments and the stuff that was really warm without necessarily going over like being too many effects or too much compression or too loud. It's a very warm album. I don't know if you agree.
I would have taken a bit more warmth, honestly. I feel like that that statement we made earlier about, you know, recording both in digital and tape. I feel like because they had the luxury of going back to the digital recordings, and I think that they used a lot of those, especially for the voices. I feel like it makes it a bit too polished for my taste. But going back to the like their process of recording the album, what I was stunned to read online was the fact that they barely did any EQing while tracking, and even during the mixing stage, like they really did it the old-fashioned way, where they got the tones and the mic placements, and then how the room reverberated on certain pieces of equipment, whether it be the drums or whatever, and they really got it right before actually recording. And sometimes we get lost in that that art nowadays, where we think that we can always, you know, EQ it more, compress it more, change it more, because we kind of have the tools and the means to do it, where in the computer nothing is really a destructive process, or at least not as much as it is on, you know, tape, for example.
For me, it's the right way to do it, right? When you're like recording a sound, for me, your job is to find not only like the right notes and how to play it and the right groove and to be like in the pocket or playing with the drums. It's, you need to find the right sound for like the concept of the song, right? And if you know your direction, if you know exactly what you're looking for and what it's supposed to sound like, normally, if you're doing a good job, of course you're going to have minimal EQ and compressing afterwards, because like you said, you took care of that before. Let's say for a singer, you're going to be singing a little bit louder at certain places, you're going to be singing a little bit softer at certain places, you're going to compress your voice yourself. Same thing for guitar. So I think that's exactly what they did. Like, let's say if we take the guitars of Nile Rodgers, it's pretty much like straight out of his amp. There's no messing around on it, and he could play it even without an amp on his Fender Stratocaster, and you hear the same. It's the same sound except that it's amplified. So for me, that shows how mature they are, and that the fact that they work with very good people, that once you have that right take, and you took, like you said, you took care with the right mic placement and the right like orienting the amp in a certain way, or using multiple mics to get that grittiness that you want, or so they pretty much EQ'd their sound by using mic placement, different amp heads, different guitars. You know, that's how you would do it in the old days, right?
Exactly. Moving on to the mixing process, I have a bit of trivia for you. Do you know what is the only plugin that was used during the mixing of Random Access Memories?
Like plugin in the Pro Tools?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I thought they mixed everything on a console with like minimal,
They did. But
minimal EQ.
There is apparently only one plugin that was used in the entire mixing and or recording mastering process of the album.
Is it something that's easy that I should know? Is it, first of all, is it an effect?
It is not per se what we would call an effect.
Okay. So I don't know. It's a very difficult question. I'm going to say, I really don't know. There's so many plugins. I could just say one, you know.
So playing it safe, huh? The only plugin that was used, apparently, according to Peter Franco, was a de-esser by UAD, and they used that particular de-esser because they had more control for all of the vocals, and that is apparently the only plugin that they used.
Wow. Okay. So basically, the Pro Tool was a glorify tape machine.
I think they really just used it to narrow down the number of tracks.
Yeah, to edit, because I think they had both. They recorded both on tape and in the Pro Tools, and then they would transfer everything from the tape, and then they would just choose which one sounded best, right?
Yes, exactly. And because they wanted to move it out again on the mixing console, which I believe had somewhere around 72 tracks max. So they had to narrow down their choices for everything down to 72 tracks, or they had to group certain things in order to accommodate the console.
Well, that's the best way, man. You have to, at some point, you have to narrow it down. I think that's one of the problems that we have. I think we've talked about this in the past. Too much is kind of like not enough. It's kind of like shoes. If you go to a store and you find there's like 5 pair of shoes on the wall, you're like, well, where's the rest? But if you go into a shoe store and there's 400 pairs on the wall, you're like, oh, what do I choose? I think it's the same thing in digital recording. We have like today we have infinite tracks in our DAWs, infinite recording. Like the limit is basically the size of your hard drives, and so we've been pushed into this spot of we don't have to make any more choices. We don't have to bounce things. We can just keep everything. You can keep the MIDI track as they are. We have enough processing powers to have, 15 Omnisphere on each track playing at the same time. It's gonna work out. And I think we lost that little, like, at some point you have to make a decision, combine it, like burn it. That's it. This is the way it is. And I think it's important to get that in our heads. And even today that we have the choice that at some point you have to make a decision. You have to bounce it. You have to say, this is over. This is what I'm using. Print the effect on it. That's it. What do you think?
I think I've struggled, and we were talking about that off air again, about the fact that we still haven't really put out an album to our own names, even though we've been producers for countless other artists. And I think that it stems from the fact that computers give us too many options, and then you start worrying about the wrong stuff. When I answer comments on our YouTube videos, for example, you see all these beginners. I had a question today, and by no means I want to demean that person who is starting out and had the best of intentions. But the person was asking, is this particular microphone good for singing and rapping? And I thought that in the video, I did a pretty decent job at showing that even though the mic was ultra cheap, it still gave great results. And so just by, again, like you often say, if you know the limitations of a certain piece of gear and you use it for something it's good at, well, it doesn't matter if it's cheap or if it's worth $1,000, or several $1,000s for that matter.
Exactly.
So I think that we need to be able to go back to, I think, understanding the limitations of certain piece of gear, and also being aware that the computer has virtually no limitations, and that can become a problem in the creative process. And that's why I made it a point to talk about how the Daft Punk guys were writing the earlier sketches of their album. They just used like really carefully chosen synthesizers, and that was it. They used the colors that came from those palettes, and they moved on afterwards to getting some musicians on board, and then getting the right engineers and building a process with these engineers where they record on both digital and tape, and then choose a method of separate the wheeze, if you will, from the the wheat, choosing the right tracks, and then finally getting all of that out of the computer to put their hands on those knobs on the console and really get a feel for how the music should sound at the very end of the process.
True, like we said earlier, the way it was done, like before, since before we didn't have that many choices, it was really up to the player and the producer to really get that sound from the beginning, right? And they would pretty much, like, you would become creative and well, in those specific environments, in those big studios, with the what you did with the console, what you did with the outboard, what you did with, like we said earlier, the mics and everything. But at the same time, if you think about it, it's a very simple chain. You got a person playing an instrument, going through 2-3 different things in the console and to tape. It's it's pretty simple. Today, we don't have necessarily all that gear at our houses or in our bedrooms, but the complexity appears in the computer, where we can bust different things and use different plugins, and the fact that we have all these choices, and like we can have like 300 MIDI tracks and Symphobia and Omnisphere at the same time and everything. So you kind of change the complexity where it's going, like in the box instead of being out of the box. And what Daft Punk did was that, yes, it was a $1 million record, but they didn't bring the complexity of working in a computer or with like roll-on gear or all the boxes they used to do. They didn't bring that to the studio. They did something else. They wanted to do it like the old way, with just like crafting the ideas and then using session players to take it to another level and then recording it. And that's how I saw it.
Yeah, I think they're also very aware of and that's going to be maybe debatable, but the lack of soul sometimes that computerized music has. Whereas, when everything goes through circuitry and everything is based off of a human being's emotional performance, if you will, there's something that you can't quite capture in just an in-the-box setting.
True.
Yeah.
You need that human feel. Little trivia for you. When Peter Franco finished the mix at the Conway studio in LA, how did he send the mix to get it mastered in New York?
Oh, wow. I guess he had it printed on reels. I don't know.
Well, actually, the story behind the whole thing is that when they finished the mix at Conway Studio, it was such a big secret, that album. They didn't want anything to get out or to have like these usual like these leaks and everything on all these websites. So basically, he didn't trust anyone else but himself. He took his car from LA. He drove to New York to the mastering engineer studio to give him the tapes. Wow, that's dedication.
Across the country. That's
across the country.
I mean, if there would have been leaked versions of the songs, for sure it would have killed the buzz that they actually created.
It was the whole mystery. The whole mystery of what it was supposed to be. And it was, even if you look, like we talked about earlier, the first time we heard it on the SNL promo during the commercial breaks, and the first time we saw the album cover with the two robots like cut in half, and with the title of the album written exactly the same way as on Thriller of Michael Jackson. And I think that was the whole mystery and the whole buzz and everything. Don't you agree?
I think they proved that not only are they, master musicians and producers, but they also are incredible marketing masterminds.
Yeah.
and they even bought billboards on is it Rodeo Boulevard in LA? I don't know, but they even like the marketing that they did was analog. You know what I mean? Like it followed the whole aesthetic of the project
I don't
because they
remember.
said that.
I don't
Yeah,
remember
go
what
ahead.
road it is, but I think all the way from LA to Coachella, they did it on purpose. They had these huge billboards like they used to do back in the 80s. And like in the 80s, you would have these huge billboards in Los Angeles and on the highway leading to Coachella for, I don't know, Cher and all these stars in the back, way back in the days. And they did exactly the same thing. Like we had those billboards with the robot, the robot head, the new album from Daft Punk coming. It's very, very, like you said, they weren't just masters at their music. They were also masters at the image, the brand, the marketing that they wanted to put out there.
Right. Well, they certainly achieved that and then some. And another thing that I found really, really cool is the fact that their mastering engineers, I was reading an interview with him, and he said that whenever he pushed the master too loud, whether the snare started to crack a bit too much, Bangalter would say, you need to pull things back. Like I don't need it to be loud. I need it to be right, and especially at the time, I think that the loudness wars were at their peak in 2013, 2014, whatever.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I think it's a perfect example of them having a specific vision of like not necessarily following in the tracks of what everyone was doing at the time, and they really wanted to sound the way they wanted it to sound. Like when he says I want it to sound right, that's what he's saying, And I think what they were saying basically was that we want to keep the dynamics of the songs. We want to have that special envelope that not too loud, that the way it was in the 80s, the 70s, because back in the days they had dynamics because of technical limitations, but today we don't have that anymore. Because back in the days you couldn't have too much bass on a record because there's a specific, like, you can't go over a certain frequency if you're printing on vinyl, basically, right?
Right.
You can't have tracks that are too long because it's the same thing. A vinyl is a physical medium that you can't have 120 minutes on one side of a vinyl. And that's why, we've talked about this before, that's why Quincy Jones remixed Thriller like 2 times so that each, like, the number of tracks would fit on each side, because some tracks were too long, some tracks were too short, and he remixed it a couple of times before he got it right. So kudos to them for saying that they didn't want necessarily the album to be as loud as it could, but that they wanted like each rendition of each track to be the way they wanted to be, like the way they heard it in their heads.
So, do you want to go over some of the tracks, and then let's discuss a bit what goes on in each of these songs?
Should we maybe take one or two?
Of course. What's your favorite track of the album?
For me, favorite track, I'm sure you're gonna know which one it is. For me, it's gonna be Giorgio by Marauder.
Oh,
that for me
pick.
is it's my favorite track.
Great pick. I thought it was a bit too close to the Scarface theme. I feel like it kind of sounded like a Giorgio Moroder ripoff.
But it's exactly what it is. It's an homage.
Right. So I guess they told him, like, we've got this arpeggiator, whatever, and we want it to sound exactly like you. But I don't know. I felt even at the first listen that kind of was a bit too close. I wanted to hear a bit more, but it's a great track. Nonetheless, it's one of the best cuts on the album for sure.
For me, it's my best track. I think it's the first track that I think I even listened to, because at first when the album came out, they had I don't know if it was on Spotify or if it was on don't know, Apple Music or something. I think you could listen to all of the tracks for free for like a day
It
or
was on
two. It was on
Apple
Apple
Music.
Music. Like you could
Yep.
listen for a track for free for a couple of days before the release of the album. So I think like that track, I think I listened to it like over and over and over for a couple of days. And of course,
Well,
for me, the magic of that track is first, like you said, it sounds like a Giorgio Moroder track, like an old soundtrack, a little bit of mix of a little bit of Scarface mixed with Midnight Express, mixed with some Donna Summer, like everything that we love about Giorgio Moroder. I think it's in there, and also all the different musicians that were on there. That like for me, like the bass, Nathan East, who played on so many great records. From I think on the bass part, I think Nathan East played with he played with Michael Jackson, he played with Babyface, Peter Gabriel, Eric Clapton, Herbie Hancock. I mean, Phil Collins, you name it, that guy played on it. You know.
so is
Also,
he the guy that did most of the bass lines on the album?
yeah. Well,
'Cause I was trying to.
there was two guys. There was Nathan East and there was James Jennis, but mostly I think all the tracks were done by Nathan East.
Okay.
He also played with Stevie Wonder. So like not these guys weren't, they didn't start playing yesterday. So you could understand why the robots picked them. So for me
Sure.
that was the magic of that track. It had that Giorgio Moroder vibe, but it also left enough space to give all these awesome musicians space to like show their talent. There's many places where it's just like kind of a jam of everything, and you can hear like the drums, Omar Hakim playing the drum and the way he plays the drums, and that's what I liked. It was a very lively feeling, something that we're not very it's not very usual for Daft Punk to have on their records.
As well as disco strings.
Exactly, and that we could talk about this for another half hour. The way the orchestration on this album has been like absolutely like out of this world. That's another episode.
Yeah.
On your side,
Yeah.
what's your favorite track?
Well, just before moving on to my favorite track of the album, I also thought it would be good for people, if they haven't heard it, to go back and listen to Giorgio's monologue at the very beginning of the track. I think it speaks volumes to what we all go through as musicians, and it's this, war between trying to please our parents, choosing a safe path, choosing education and then a stable job instead of chasing your dreams as an artist and as a musician. And even a legend like Giorgio Moroder had gone through these these difficult times at the very beginning when he just started DJing. But he had this vision. He already saw himself, creating music for the future, and he says that, and I thought that was just brilliant.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
My favorite track by far has to be "Give Life Back to Music," the intro to the album.
The intro, yeah.
Because when I had heard, the snippets online of "Get Lucky," I thought that the album would be pretty much all of that, all over the album, and that one particularly for me, the way it's written, because it's much less repetitive than Get Lucky. I mean, I don't get me wrong, I loved Get Lucky, and it's probably still my number 2 on the album. But I felt like with the combination of the rock stuff and the super epic vibe of that track, like it's the perfect intro to the album. And honestly, when you just reminded me that's where I listened to it, because I was scratching my head like, I don't have a CD of that album here.
You don't have the CD of that album.
No, I don't.
How dare you? How dare you?
I know. I never purchased it.
Come on, man.
I never purchased it. I had it for free on Apple Music, and once I moved on to Spotify, well, that was it. I would just go back to my Spotify and listen to it. So I've never paid for that classic album. But yeah, for me,
I I
Give
have
Back
I
Like the
have them in
Music
CD.
is the best of all worlds, where you have, the great, Digitech Talker performance, much better actually than all of their previous albums. Like, they really did a great job of making those robot voices stand out in the mix, and they really mastered the art of recording that vocoder pedal. And then,
Well, actually,
they
I
yeah, go
think
ahead.
that on that album, they would, like, on all the previous album, usually they're trying to take a human voice and make it sound like a robot, right?
Yeah,
That's what they're usually trying to do. And I think that on that album, they did the exact opposite. They tried to have a robot voice sound a little bit more human. That's my take on it. And it's a little bit clearer. You can hear the voice, or a little bit, you can understand them a little bit better. It's as if they wanted to kind of counter the whole, I don't know if you remember back then, but the whole detuning and retuning of the voice was all in the rage, and the Britneys and everyone was like retuning their voice with the like a basic tuner. Basically, even on live concerts, you would hear it when their voice would go through it. So you basically didn't even have to sing in the right key. The machine would just overcorrect it.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know if it was because of that, but I think the robots sound a little bit more human on this album. Maybe it's just me.
Well, no, I think it's been stated in several, articles. Maybe they even said it themselves in some interviews. But they absolutely try to, blend like the live instruments with the robot voice, and kind of have everybody meet in the middle, if you will.
Yeah.
So, okay, so what would you change to that album, if there was something that you could go back in time and change to your liking?
Like which songs, or
Either a song or an aspect, like maybe some of the musicians they picked, or some sounds, whatever it is. Is there something
um
that you would change on that album?
for me, the only thing I didn't really like on the song on this album, pardon, probably, which song? There's one song that I don't really appreciate. It's the I think it's Fragment of Time. It's towards the end.
Yep.
I think I don't know. It's with the vocals with Todd Edwards.
Yep.
I think he already did another song on another Daft Punk. He did something on Discovery, right? I think so.
Probably. It kind of has that Face to Face 2.0 feel.
Yeah,
So it might be.
it's
Is it
very
that one?
it's very simple. It's very, I don't really identify with that song. All the other songs have something really special. I love Motherboard. I love Contact. I love one of my other favorites is Doing It Right.
Yep.
Doing It Right with Panda Bear. For me, that's it. That's, I think it's the most Daft Punk song on the record. I think it's one of the only songs that, first of all, has a drum machine.
Yep.
There's no real drums on that. It's, if you hate all the other songs, I think that's the one that you're gonna say, oh, that sounds about right for Daft Punk. But it's, so I think they maybe gave a little piece of chocolate to the, like, to the old times doing that song. For me, that's pretty much it. Aside from that one song that I don't really like, the rest, everything is pretty much on par. The mix is on par. That analog warmth is on par. The mastering is on par. I don't know. What about you?
So you made some great points. Fragments of Time is absolutely a skipper for me.
Oh, yeah,
That's
yeah.
a forward material for sure.
I was listening to it the other day, and I was like, I don't know that song. What is that song? I don't know that song. So
Yeah.
I've been skipping it for like years.
So there's a lot of things, because I was trying to figure out if I thoroughly enjoyed that album, or if I actually several years later was kind of disappointed by the album, and I still don't quite have the answer to that, because obviously, like I said in the previous episode, I'm a diehard fan through and through, so I need to come to terms with whatever I didn't like about the album. But so here it goes. First, I think the pacing of this album is totally wrong. If you just look at the first two songs, you have Give Life Back to Music, which is kind of an epic rock disco anthem. And then you move really low in terms of energy with the Game of Love.
True. It goes down
which
super
is,
fast, yeah. It should be maybe a song that should have been more towards the end.
Yeah, for sure. And then, and next is the fact that they did not, maybe it's a reflection of where they're at in their careers. Like, they're super rich. They don't have like any difficulty with making ends meet, and
that struggle is not there anymore.
It shows in the lyrics. They're not witty as much as they used to be. They're not like really giving that lesson to society on what's actually going wrong with us human beings. Whereas in the past, you had stuff like, television rules the nation, and then the harder, better, faster, stronger, and all of these reflections on modern society, which were really, really, really pinpoint accurate, and then which really made us have to go back and kind of analyze and reflect on, is technology actually killing us, And now it's just these super cheesy, easy lyrics that don't make you scratch your heads at all. And so that was a big disappointment for me. One that I would say meets actually those standards is the one that you've picked. Is it Doing It Right? Doing It Right was kind of what you would expect from catchy Daft Punk hooks. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Like, for me, songs like Doing It Right, Beyond, Motherboard, those are the songs that I really like. I must admit, even if it's a bit cheesy, Instant Crush, I think, had something pretty special too.
Yeah, I think so. I think that they had that kind of nod on the synthesizers to aerodynamics, and
the one with it's the singer from the Strokes, I think, Julian Casablanca. For
only
me, that
thing with that one, sorry, I don't want to cut you, but
it's a special track because it doesn't sound like any other track. It's like it has really its own sound.
Yeah, you weren't uneasy at all with the fact that it's kind of a Layla ripoff?
Well, Layla 2013, but I think since the album is pretty much an homage to all the, say, they wanted to recreate the Dark Side of Moon of Pink Floyd. They wanted to recreate a little bit of the sounds of like the Eagles and say all these old bands, So it doesn't surprise me sometimes that some riff are gonna resemble something, or say, after all, there are only 12 notes in music, right?
Of course. Well, the remaster was 2013, but Layla, it came out in 92. So yeah, I mean, they probably were inspired by Eric Clapton at some point. But okay, so let me finish on this rant and also praise.
You're being so controversial today, man. You're hating. I was gonna start the podcast by saying that you hated the album, and I know that you hated the album, but I decided to be more on the softer side. Now I regret the fact that I called it to myself this morning. I was gonna say he hates it. You hate the album. Admit it right away before we start.
Well, if you want to have that kind of praise, you will need to put your balls on the table and go ahead and call it at the right time, because now it's too late.
But here you go. We're finishing with the rant.
So for me, there's two albums on this album. There's the, Give Life Back to Music, Giorgio, Instant Crush, Lose Yourself to Dance, Get Lucky. all of these work together, and then you have the weird jazz fusion ballads, which are too sad, too, like, I don't get it. Like, you have those incredibly joyful songs, party tracks, and then you need stuff like Within, and even, Touch, and what else? I mean, like we said, Fragments of Time. There's a lot of tracks that are kind of, I don't know.
They're a bit like downers.
Yeah, they're downers.
Yeah, they're really they're well executed. The idea is good. The orchestration before
is masterful.
Before Within or something. It's fantastic how it's done. But you're right that the energy is a little bit. It's not a. When you start listening to the album, you're thinking, oh, it's kind of a discovery, but like matured 2013, like with like another concept, like positivity and something that like makes you want to party, like you said. And then as more as you go along, you're like, the message isn't that clear, and it's a downer.
And even the emotion is not quite clear sometimes. Like maybe it's the whole, like you said, Pink Floyd influence because I'm not a Pink Floyd guy by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, I can absolutely appreciate their mastery and their influence on countless modern acts. But like, I don't really vibe to those. And even like, personally, I think that some of my favorite tracks of Daft Punk are their ballads. Stuff like Something About Us, Make Love, Emotion, and Veridis Quo. But those are not corny and cheesy. They're not overly sad either. They're just right in there in that R&B type pocket with a super electronic sound. And again, nobody else did that before them. A lot of French acts followed in those footsteps. But yeah, so I mean, and then there's this whole also jazz fusion thing that they allowed to go on. Like, it kind of works on Contact with the almost drum and bass drums.
Mm-hmm.
But on other tracks, like Within, for example, or is it The Game of Love? I can't remember. They have those kind of jazz hats,
at the same time,
shuffles.
At the same time, it's kind of normal. Like most of the musicians that they hired are jazz musicians. So
that's why.
So in a way, if they were jamming out the songs, and if they were taking snippets of everything that, like the basic concept of what everyone was doing, it kind of, it's understandable that some tracks have a little bit of a jazzy feel to it, or I thought that some tracks had I think it was, which one was it? Let's see. I don't know if it was not Within. Touch. I think it's the end of Touch that it sounds like basically kind of like a circus band or something, or like a
fanfare,
fanfare circus band, like something that you would see at like under a tent somewhere with elephant or something. So it's fun. But it's like, I think everyone can have an opinion on it, but those type of little ad libs for me is not quite Daft Punkish, like in the way I define them. But I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that at some point you have to reinvent yourself, and it doesn't always go. You can't reinvent yourself if you keep rewriting the same songs. That's what. Of
course, and that's why I'm trying to remind myself of all the good things that this album did, because it's unfair for me to ask for what I love about them, and not let them show us the broader range of musical knowledge that they have, because basically that's what putting an album together is. You're trying to pay homage to all of the people that influenced you in a way. So I guess that we just hadn't never seen this more rock and
Lots of
lack
money
of a
beat.
better word, I'm gonna say the white side to them.
Oh, that's controversial. That's controversial.
Well, coming from the white guy, I guess it's less.
Yeah, you have the right to
I'm
call.
not gonna drop the R word, but maybe it is a bit racist what I'm saying. But they have the super groovy stuff for all of their career, and now they come out with a jazz album with little to no groove on certain songs, at least for me, in terms of dancing.
But at the same time, for me, once again, playing devil's advocate here, it's kind of understandable. They've never worked with musicians before. They had, like, I think maybe when they started, like when they were 16, maybe they had a band with drums and guitar or something, right? And that was pretty much it. And then it was just them with the machine composing everything. So in a way, it's normal that, how can I say this? When you have a limited experience of something, you're going to get excited about certain things that other people necessarily, maybe they're not going to get excited about or something. So maybe that's a little bit part of the whole thing. Like, you come and you play with these great musicians and they do these super jams and you come up with these great ideas. For you, it's like a novel thing. It's like fantastic. You're like, wow, I've never done this before. I've never had a band with a bass player who played with Madonna, with Michael Jackson, with Quincy Jones. And you kind of get over the top. So maybe these little songs, or the ones that we don't appreciate, maybe they're a little bit because of that, but that's just it's just my opinion. I'm not saying it's the truth. We're talking here.
Yeah, you know what? It goes out to prove that you can't just let's say we compare this album to one of the Earth, Wind and Fire classics. It goes out to show that there's a difference between a band that plays together all the time and that they come together in the studio to record an album versus piecing a band together for the purpose of recreating the ideas of the songwriters.
Yes, totally true.
I mean, you can feel, and that's another, I know they're piling up now, but that's another letdown for me, is the fact that, well, obviously Nile Rodgers did his thing for sure, and all of his riffs are incredibly catchy on the album, whereas the two good guys that played the bass, for example, are really low key, and they're not letting their basses growl nowhere on the album. They don't have any kind of classic bass lick anywhere on the album. They're really just playing their part, super low key, and trying not to get in the way of anyone. You know what I mean? And
True.
That to me hurts the classicness, if that's the word, of the album.
Well, at the same time, you can't expect like a studio musicians or like a makeshift band to act like a collective that's been playing for 20 years with all the emotional baggage, with all the shows that they've done together and the way they know each other. So it's kind of of course you can't expect that same magic. So it's
no, of course not.
So
I agree.
So they're a little bit in the middle. Like people are saying, well, it's not quite Daft Punk, so because it's not electronic enough, and people are saying it's not quite like as a band, but they're not a band. So you're kind of in this middle spot. So
yeah, I mean, it just made me. I'm not saying like it just made me realize that the band is still a relevant concept in modern music, where human beings come together and they fight and they put together classic stuff and they put some horrible stuff as well. But I mean, at the end of the day, what a band does is create synergy, hopefully.
True. You see, that's why I didn't challenge you at the beginning of the podcast. I wanted to leave all the negative rant for the end.
Well, I mean, when it comes to Daft Punk, I certainly have an opinion.
No, you're passionate about it.
And if you really want me to answer the question, if you would have come out right out the gate and asked me, did you hate the album? I would have said, no, I did not. I absolutely listened to the album. First of all, it had been several years that I hadn't listened to an album from the first song to the last without skipping anything dozens of times. I mean, I listened to the whole thing probably 50 times at least. And so it's just that at the end of the day, I don't find myself going back to it the way I do with the previous 3 albums. It's just not there. And there's a lot of songs that I'll just listen to the great intro and fast forward really quick to the ones that I can keep going back to effortlessly. So it's to me, it is not, and I know they try to do that, but it is not their Thriller. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. You have the right to your opinion. And on that note, how can we end the show, JT?
Well, in these times of confinement, there is no better time to probably put a few more arrows into your weapon assortment. And that would be to pay us a visit at delicatebeats.com. And on this website of ours, there's a lot of tools and a lot of weapons that you can add to your arsenal for your production duties, whether it be, awesome Serum sound design packs, or, we have great bass packs, instruments for contact such as King, for example, or Sub if you're more of the 808 type. And then we have some drum libraries. We have a book also titled The Bedroom Super Producer. And finally, we have a bunch of other cool things on the blog if you want to nerd out some more with us. Also, if you want to keep us nerd out on this podcast, pay us a visit on Apple Podcasts. Drop us a cool little review, ideally with no less than 5 stars, because we want you guys to help us get up in the rankings and get more bedroom super producers like you in our tribe. What else can our awesome listeners do? They can also maybe pay us a visit on social media.
That's right. Social media, the same places as usual. Visit our site on the Instagram. Check out all the wonderful tutorials that we do on YouTube. The Facebook page. Also the site if you want to subscribe to the newsletter. That's a great idea. And even in these difficult times, we're going to say stay safe, stay inside, keep making all these great tracks. It's a perfect opportunity to make some music, to learn some new skills until we can go outside and play, do a town jam and in the park. And on that note, I think we're going to say until next week. Right, JT?
Until next week, my dog.
All right.
Staying confined in our respective home studios. But Delicate Beats is the name. Find us, like BK said, on all social media. Keep producing. Keep nerding out with us. And we'll see you in the next one.
Perfect. Peace out, guys.
Peace.